Hey everybody, Do Less Podcast. You are now doing less with John and Jeff. Welcome back. I haven't recorded an episode in a while, but we got some requests to do an episode about a very hot topic due to a new documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. And we agreed, we thought that would be a good topic to cover. So we actually just watched it and we took some notes, and so we have a lot of stuff to talk about. I guess first off, Jeff, I'll ask you: is it a must watch? Would you consider The Social Dilemma on Netflix a must watch?
Fuck this movie. No, I'm just kidding. It's if you're not familiar with the business models of social media and sort of the various practices going on there and how they sort of monetize and how that whole system works, then I think this movie will be informative and a useful way to spend your time. I think the acting in the movie is kind of terrible. They probably could have just left that out. But it does sort of have one point of view of social media. It's a very negative point of view of social media. There's not a lot of positive things to say about it throughout the whole thing. But I think while it may not have been very novel to me, because I already had a pretty good understanding of how the business models of these companies worked, if you weren't aware of that, it's definitely a good use of your time, because I think it is important to sort of understand these things.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a must watch in terms of the lesson. I think everybody in the whole country and the whole world needs to be aware of the lesson. I think this specific documentary is probably a pass. I don't know. I think we'll get into some of the things about this documentary in particular, but if you're not familiar with the subject matter, then yeah, absolutely do whatever you can to make yourself aware of what the thesis is. The thesis is, you're on your phone, and it's not just that's not nothing. There's so much going on beyond just the simple scrolling. There's psychological hacks. There's addiction mechanisms of your social media, of your the time that's spent on your phone, that is tailoring the product to suck the most time from you as it can, and in doing so, it will actually manipulate you, especially if you're if you're more manipulatable, like someone like a teenage girl. There are drastic effects that it can have on that person. But so I guess what I'm trying to say in summary is that's a very important lesson, and I highly agree with teaching that lesson, educating people. But I kind of have some hang-ups about this this particular documentary. So you said, Jeff, how they treat the social media companies in this documentary. Why don't you talk a little bit more about how they're depicted and if you deem that accurate?
Yeah, well, so it definitely has sort of a one-sided perspective, like I said, and it views these social media companies as basically doing more harm than good. I would probably guess from the sentiment of this movie, and I actually might agree with that in a sense that, you might say that by definition, the fact that there's a market for it means there's more. It's bringing more value to the table than it's destroying, in the sense that it's profitable. But I would say a society that's addicted to heroin, yes, heroin is theoretically bringing value to that market in the sense that people are valuing the heroin, but I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for a society to be addicted to heroin. So I might actually agree with the premise that currently we are allowing social media to negatively impact our mental health and how we interact with our friends and strangers online is probably more like we're not valuing enough how damaging it is to ourselves, and therefore we are, as a collective marketplace, overvaluing social media. And I think we can correct that by how we decide to use it. But I would say this movie has a very it treats them kind of like evil geniuses, or like kind of like a Bond villain or something like that. And it just seems a bit hyperbolic to me. It doesn't come off as a very reasoned, let's present both sort of sides, many perspectives on this issue. It's kind of really one-sided. And honestly, the movie itself seems to engage in the very tactics it's criticizing, where it's like it seems to try to use like emotional gut punches and lots of like sinister music, and like they throw in acting and scenes in there that are very like sinister and like try to spook you. And so it's like it's sort of trying to get an emotional rise out of you to convey something, and that's exactly what it's sort of criticizing social media of doing. So in that sense, it's kind of a very hypocritical movie, and I don't know. I'm just not a big fan of this particular movie, to be honest.
Yeah, I love that point. So this is a documentary, and a lot will probably say that it was a well-made documentary. Why is it a well-made documentary? Well, it really triggered emotional responses in you, and it made you want to watch until the end, and it made you want to find out what the people had to say. All these things. It's like, well, they're literally saying in the documentary that that's manipulation. It's like you gotta, So are we gonna? So what Jeff and I are sitting here saying is not that to make a good documentary, you're a bad person. No, of course not. It's a good if it's a good documentary, you want to watch it. It triggers emotional response, all that stuff. So why is it different from social media? Yes, social media is so much more effective at it. Like it's like probably the most effective, manipulation vector that exists known to man or whatever. But it's born out of the same motives of making a documentary to make people feel an emotional response. So it's like it's very disingenuous to attribute these social media companies with evil. They're evil. That these are like criminals essentially because of what they're doing to you. But meanwhile, we're actually going to make a documentary and we're going to make you feel that they're criminals. Like we're gonna, but we're not criminals for making you feel a certain way, but they make you feel a certain way. So
right. And like one of the things they talk about is like all these different apps are competing for your attention. Well, this movie is also competing for your attention.
Right. It's literally Netflix.
A lot of things compete for your attention. That's a lot of different business models are engaged in the competition for your attention. And so that's not in itself like trying to be the most provocative thing out there is just part of how you compete, because if you're not provocative, you don't really get anyone's attention. Right. And so it's not necessarily nefarious, I think, to be provocative and interesting to people. But like I said, there is valuable information in this movie if you were previously unaware. So, I mean, let's go into essentially how the business model of a social media company works if you're unfamiliar with it. So something like Google, right? You don't pay for Google. So it's a free service. And to me, that's pretty awesome. I'm probably in the camp where if Google wanted to charge for its services, I would prefer the current business model than that if they charge me for it. So the way the business model currently works is, I get Google for free, and Google records a bunch of information about me, like what I search, that's most of it, but like, they have your email and other stuff
you're interested in. Yeah. Right. Just what you're going to be doing, what you're going to be buying.
Right. And so they're just they're building a picture of essentially who you are, what your mood is, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason they're doing this, the reason they're trying to gather all this data on who you are as a person and what you're interested in, is because they're trying to sell that or use that information to target you as efficiently as possible with advertisements. So their customer, you're not Google's customer because you don't pay Google. Google's customers are companies that advertise on Google. And the way Google makes like 90% of its money is ads. So whenever you search something, the top 2 or 4 results now even are ads. And those ads.
And you're saying Google, but this also applies for Facebook and Twitter,
they're all
and
essentially the same business model.
This is all the business model.
Right. They all engage in basically the same exact business model. Snap does the worst at it. They don't make any money. But I digress. So essentially, like if I'm a company and I want to advertise my business, I don't want to advertise to anyone that's never going to buy my product. Like if I'm like a tampon company, I don't want to be advertising to any men at all, right? That's an easy one to filter for. But the point is, like, you can think of a million different like ways. Like if I'm a video game company, I want to be advertising to nerds. I don't want to be advertising to anyone else, you know? Like, so, because every person I advertise to that is like 0% chance of buying my product is a waste of my ad money. And so what Google has done is they've eliminated tons of waste in the advertising industry. Previously, before Google, you were not able to target your advertisements like this. So like if I was a business, I would buy an ad and like, I mean, you could still sort of do it. Like you could put your ads with a certain TV program and that would sort of filter, like if it was like a sci-fi show, maybe that's a better sort of market for what you're doing. Or if it's like the news, maybe you can like advertise like prescription drugs or something because usually older people watch that. But like essentially all these different mediums are doing is like filtering groups of people out for you that companies may or may not want to advertise to. And social media has done this the best of anyone.
Yeah, I really want to stress the point you made because it's kind of one of my biggest takeaways from this whole conversation. It's like give people the choice, right? So the movie was focused on the fact that we don't have this choice. Like these companies are just doing this to us. They're just taking our attention and they're just, you know, manipulating us without our consent, right? That's kind of the message. My idea is if you're an adult reading that or hearing that, you know, you should be saying to as an adult, I don't like that. I'm going to make a decision that's not going to, you should do an audit of your time on these apps, right. On these apps. You think about it. Am I spending time on these? Do I want to be spending time? Do I want to be spending 10, 15, 20 hours a week on these apps? Yes. Then you're an adult and you can do that. No, then dial it back. It's up to you.
Right.
Also, for adults, you should be thinking, are my kids using it for these amount of times? Are they using it the way I want them to? Are they learning? Are they benefiting? Are they just comparing their likes that they get to their friend in a kind of a zero sum, like bashing their head against a wall kind of, not beneficial manner. Stuff like that. Like you as an adult should be going through these decisions and making that choice. I think that there's something to be said about, are they doing it without like advertising? Like the fact that Google doesn't come out and say like, oh, by the way, you don't know this about us, but we have all our information about you. It's like, yeah, I mean, you could not like that, but the fact is of the matter now is that now.
Right.
And like Jeff was saying, you should be able to make a choice. Like he said, if I know this about Google, which I do, I know how they make money off of me, but I get all this stuff for free. I get this lightning fast search. I get this document functionality, like basically Excel for free. I get call, through Google, like Hangouts. I get storage with our Drive. It's like, that's a lot of efficiency for me.
Email.
Yeah, I use their Gmail. It's like, I don't have to pay for any of that. yeah, they know more about me. So I'm probably going to get some ads that are more targeted to me than I otherwise would have gotten. You know what I mean? So I can actually make that choice as an adult. It's like, oh, I think I'm being manipulated a little bit. Okay, I'm going to dial back my notifications from Gmail. You know, I'll turn those off on my phone, for example. Like there are things you can do that can reestablish yourself as the decision maker in this relationship where you're not just being this mindlessly manipulated sheep, right? You as an adult can make that decision. And I think that's the important part. It's not important to make them out to seem evil because they're trying to earn a profit. Like I think that's so missing the point. Like the point is not to hate Google for helping you, you know, and taking some money and some profits in the process. It's appreciate them for what they've done, but also understand the real drawbacks that you may not have understood to date, and then you know, and then rating that relationship in a way that you deem beneficial to you.
Right. And like, so one of the points I feel like this movie's trying to make is that this business model is a bad one, a dangerous one, and that we need to basically ban this business model. And that seems like counterproductive to me, because I think most people would rather have these companies collect data on them, information about them, and use that to target advertisements than they would pay for them. So you're basically taking that option away from people. And the way I know people would probably choose that is because there have been companies that have said, we're not going to collect any data on you, but because we're not doing that, you have to pay us because otherwise we can't make money, right? Like if they're not selling advertisements that are I mean, they could sell untargeted ads, but that's not like a very competitive business model, obviously, because the targeted ads are more valuable. And so like those companies that are not selling targeted ads, they're probably not making as much profit and therefore not able to customize the experience or make the experience as like awesome as they possibly can, like something like Google or whatever can, and like make it just very engaging. And then the strict alternative, if you want no advertisements at all, like then you'd have to pay for it. And like no one does that. I've never met a single person that pays for any sort of social media or like tech company. Like I just don't know anyone that does that. So it's like, to me, it like
I think we know someone who paid for Tinder.
That's true. We do know someone who did that. But like, you know, we sort of we have all already sort of made this decision. Granted, I think a lot of people are unaware of the business model, and maybe that may affect some people's decisions. But honestly, like, I don't really care if people have all this data on me, because all they're doing is trying to sell me products with it. Like, I do have a problem if they're selling it to the government, because then they're essentially using our tax money to spy on us, and that is not something I'm comfortable with. But you know, that's a different story.
I would clarify. I would say, all things equal, I would prefer them to have less data on me, like prefer others to have less data. But in scenarios where I can actually benefit, I don't mind them like seeing how long I'm looking at this website or that link or clicking through the, you know, just stuff like that. Like, so you just got to be aware that that's the trade-off. And once you are aware of that, then you will. I'm almost certain you will browse differently than you otherwise would have. But you're in more control, and as an adult, you should be seeking that control over your own life.
Right. And if you know that they're trying to like get you addicted, and they're trying to like, their whole goal is to maximize the amount of time you spend on the app. They're trying to outrage you. They're trying to get a gut reaction out of you. Like when you're aware of that, it kind of liberates you from it a little bit better. Like if you're mindful of it, it's harder for them to like have that sort of effect on you, and then you can sort of enjoy the product without necessarily, you're basically being subsidized by all the people who are being manipulated by it. But like, I don't know, like something like Twitter, I think is a great engine for information. And, you know, I just don't engage in all the BS of Twitter. Like, it's just like, but it's like, there's all these people who I know their perspective and I know their biases and their point of view. and where they're coming from. And so being able to just have like, a rainbow of different perspectives and opinions, like bringing information to me, I think is an incredibly valuable way to sort of absorb information. And if I'm aware, like every time Twitter notifies me that they're just trying to like get me to get back on the app, well, if I'm aware of that, like it can't really affect me. So it's like I can still get the value of this product without it necessarily negatively impacting my life.
Mm-hmm. A great resource that I would recommend, maybe even in lieu of this documentary, if you're looking for some further information, would be a book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. It goes over basically a lot of these dangers that we're outlining and that the documentary outlines. And it really has this rigorous, remedy that you can kind of apply. It's one of which is like, or part of which is like a digital cleanse where you do like literally no social media for like 30 days. And it's like, so I did that. And you realize just like how little you need to use. Like, for example, on Facebook, like a good period of my life, I was spending time on Facebook, probably like, substantial hours per week, 5 hours, 6 hours per week on Facebook, scrolling through timeline, just looking at pictures of people that I haven't seen since high school, but I feel like I'm connected to, even though I'm just seeing pictures of them. And I cut it down after that digital media cleanse of not using Facebook for a whole month. I don't use Facebook more than 15 minutes a week now. Like the nice thing about Facebook is how effective they are at getting information to you. You can take advantage of that, and if you log on for 15 minutes a week, you get all of the updates. Like they'll literally compile 20 updates. You'll get 20 notifications. You go through those and you'll pretty much hit 80% of like what otherwise would have brought you value because they already know about you. So I'm like that. I'm getting just as much, probably like marginally less benefit from Facebook. I might miss this or that here or there, stuff that I might have like commented on or cared about. But rather than hours per week, I'm spending 15 minutes a week, so that I've shifted the trade-off. So now I can see like stuff, I can see these updates, but it's not taking hours and hours of my time. So that's a good example that I actually garnered from reading Digital Minimalism from Cal Newport. Yeah,
and I think an analogy is probably a pretty good analogy is like the analogy to cigarettes. Except I think social media actually has much more upside than cigarettes. Like I think there's way more benefits than cigarettes, but like it's just I think it's still like a pretty decent analogy. When cigarettes sort of first came out, people had no clue about the negative health effects of cigarettes. It's just like no one had any idea, and everyone smoked everywhere all the time, and just people had no clue it was bad for you. And then people started to realize it was terrible for your health, and then I would argue that understanding of how it impacts your health more than anything else has contributed to the decline in cigarette usage. And like more and more like private businesses will be like, this is a non-smoking. And that's just the profitable decision to make because there's more non-smokers than smokers now. Whereas like it used to be like, everyone smoked. So they would, it was better to let people smoke inside. And essentially like, I still think you should give people the option to smoke cigarettes because it can be sort of like a stress reliever. Like there's this classic sort of cliche in movies where some straight edge kind of person, like a mom or something, will be, just the world will be overwhelming. Like maybe she lost her job and then her kids are being a nightmare and just like feels like the whole world's just like weighing on her shoulders. And she'll just like go outside. She'll be like, I need a cigarette, and just like, she'll like go get a cigarette and smoke her, and she'll just in that moment have a little bit of peace. And, do I want to take that away from people just because they can be abused? No, I want people to actually have the option to use them if they want to use them or not use them if they don't want to use them, as so long as they understand, the negative health effects of a cigarette.
Yeah, I really do agree with that example, because I think the prescription is like the exact same. Because what I would say to someone who's a heavy social media user, the same as a heavy smoker, I would say, you should cut it out. Like if you can't handle that exposure, just cut it out of your life, and then don't worry. Just like do whatever you can to just cut it out. But if you can use it in a small amount and control yourself, you might actually be a lot happier with your life. So so I really do agree with that example.
And I mean, or you could use the example of like alcohol. Like some people just have to cut it out of their lives entirely because they just know they're not capable of having it in moderation, and that's just something you have to learn about yourself and understand about yourself. And yeah, that can be difficult, but I don't want to just remove people's optionality just because I sort of have this conception that I know what's best for everyone, because I don't think I know what's best for everyone, and I don't think anyone does.
Yeah. So I guess the next part of the movie that I would actually call out as something that I think is that I actually really disagree with the documentary. The way they framed their argument was one of their arguments was, we've never had this much social media before, and also we have a high amount of social unrest now. And they're framing it as, because of the social media, there is social unrest, which I think is very much a disingenuous argument. And the reason is, I think I do agree that the social unrest that we do see is higher than other points of history. I don't think it's hard to agree with that, and I don't think it's hard to agree with the fact that we have the social media aspect that's higher than ever in human history. And I do think that I could draw the line and say that social media has an impact on social unrest, but I would not say that it's because of the social media. Like there's other periods of history where there's social unrest. They didn't have Facebook, so you can't, I don't think it's fair to say that's like, look at all this. We have crumbling democracy. We have people out in the streets rioting. It's like, and now notice that Facebook has completely manipulated everyone. Does that make you want to stop using Facebook? It's like, okay, wait a minute, stop. There are a lot of reasons why people are upset, and I don't think that you can just point to social media as the reason why people are out there upset.
Yeah, I agree. That's like a very trivial argument to be like, look, unrest. What else is new? Social media is new, and that's a factor. And it's like, okay, it might be a factor, but it's definitely not the sole contributor like this sort of movie frames it out to be. Part of that is it talks about like fake news. Like there's all this fake news now. And I guess sort of the implication of that is we need people to be curators of what is truth. And that is something I am very uncomfortable with. I bet you can talk more about that, Chuck.
Yeah. Well, so one thing I would add to what I was saying earlier was, like you can point to things like, for example, Jonathan Haidt was in the documentary. He said in 2011 you can see an uptick of Facebook, or you can see an uptick of females ages 12 to 18 or whatever that are hospitalized due to self-harm, as a direct. And you could say like, oh, during that time, there's also an uptick of social media use. So stuff like that, I'm less, you can actually point to data and say like, and these girls are like quoting, Snapchat filters. It's like, oh, this is what lends to my body dysmorphia. And so stuff like that. It's like, okay, there's definitely a logical progression there. But just like saying like, oh, politics are freaking rampant.
Right.
And saying, oh, it's because you're on your circle and your social media and that's why it's more. It's like, no, it's not just that. Like there's so many other things, and there's I would say a lot of the stuff is more born out of just like a more broader economic landscape than just like a certain technology sector influence. Then I think that's very narrow-minded. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying, that to play to say who is the one that's going to be the curator of the truth is to say that there's a body that knows the truth and other people don't know the truth. When
Right.
it's literally you can't have like objectivity in conveying info. Like literally, like, so let's take an example. So if you hear that and you say you kind of don't really believe me, you say, oh, there's like there is objectivity. Like I believe that there is objectivity, and I believe that there are certain news sources that I subscribe to, and they're objective. Well, no, listen. If you were to say I have three things I want to convey, and I'm going to say A, B, and then C. Well, the fact that you said A, B, and then C is different. It's different than saying B, then A, then C, which is different than saying C, then B, then A. Like just the manner in which you present facts is itself you've introduced a subjectivity, right? You've created a logical progression. Oh, this is the way I want to. Even if you're saying in your mind, oh, I'm just being arbitrary, right? That arbitrariness is the thing that detracted from your objectivity. You've now become subjective through this arbitrary mechanism, but it's subjective nonetheless. Like you literally cannot be objective when presenting any kind of ideological argument or facts or source.
Yeah, and like you hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, we need unbiased news. We need just news that just sticks to the facts." And to me, this is like a preposterous thing to say because, if I was to give you the news of the day, a lot of stuff happened this day. There's 7 billion people on this planet. There's all sorts of natural processes happening all day long. Like, there's no shortage of information. Information is everywhere. But to basically collect just a few things together and say, this is what's important of the day is in itself bias, right? If I told you the news for the day and I was like, I had 3 hard-boiled eggs this morning, and then it rained in Sacramento, and like, what a useless set of facts that would be for anyone. Like, we all know that would be a terrible set of news stories, But the idea that, like,
I'm trying to read the news from Jeff and his Twitter feed. It's really good, but I just have to scroll through all this stuff about hard-boiled eggs. I just can't get the stuff that I need.
And it's just like the very act of like curating newsworthy information is in itself biased because you're making a conscious choice of what is important and what people need to hear about. So there is no such thing as unbiased news. I mean, news could be less partisan. That could be a thing that could be like, and that's pretty easy to do, is like you just get information from different sides of the political aisle. It's not really that hard to fix that problem. I just think like the fact that people are like clamoring for this unbiased information source, like, and they imagine that existed in the past somehow. It's like, no, there was never such thing as unbiased information. Like, it doesn't exist. So I think it's kind of silly to go down that sort of path.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an analogy of where, like, I don't know. To me, it's just like there's a lot of stuff hurling around, and it's like, oh, I want to go control everything that's hurling around, like all of the particulate out there. Like if you're in outer space, like if you're trying to fly through an asteroid belt, it's like, oh, I'm going to go and study each and every single rock that's in outer space that I will come within, a light year within every single rock, analyze the trajectory, and then I'm going to plan my path. It's like, okay, that's really tough. Or you could just, if there's some way that you could just make your craft like extremely indestructible, it's like that's way more marginally beneficial. I think the same thing is true of information discourse. Like you can say it's noble to go around and I don't know the word, temper all of the information and just make sure it's like filtered and again, we say the lens of objectivity is just at its face a fallacy. Like you can't have that objective source. But if you're going to try to scrape all the news through that lens, like you're going to be very busy. Like it's going to take forever. Or you could just convince people to read news with a with an open mind, unbiased, understand your sources, understand where things are coming from. And I feel like that's a much more marginally beneficial approach to preventing people from being biased from what they read. It's like it's like much more effective to like teach people to not take everything they read as mind altering new information and just like, this is the Babylon Bee. So just take that for a grain of salt. It's probably not true.
Yeah. I agree. It's definitely much more effective to teach people to be robust and critical thinking than it is to try to. I mean, the whole notion is actually completely preposterous. So your argument is that there's these social media companies or bots or just random people or clubs or think tanks that are out there trying to manipulate you and give specific information to you so that you think a certain way. So what we need to do is get someone out there to take all that information and scrub it through them and present you the information that person wants, and then that way we're all better off. It's like you're doing exactly what you have a problem with in the first place. You're manipulating people just through a lens that you agree with. And so right. That's such a garbage argument as far as I'm concerned. That we need this omnipotent truth seeker out there, because it just doesn't exist. The process of finding truth is difficult. It's an iterative, decentralized process that we all engage in all the time. And the idea that we can just have this central, deity that can just find truth for all of us is just it's a fantasy.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess the interesting part about the end of this documentary was like the credits. It was like talking about this stuff, like don't believe everything you read and monitor what your kids are doing on social media. Like actually taking like the real agency of trying to address this problem the way we're kind of talking about now. But that wasn't actually the presented solution in the documentary. Basically, the last
appendix.
15 minutes. Yeah, the appendix was like, yeah, this is awesome. But the kind of the conclusion or like the moving forward, the steps from the documentary was like the opposite. It's like we need to protect people by regulating these, evil corporate, profit greedy seeker,
Yeah.
So,
did you guys know that they're designing algorithms specifically to make more money?
Yeah, it's like
what?
That was literally like the woman with like the blue hair in the documentary. Like she had like a line that was literally like, I'm not even lying, verbatim. It's like when you have a corporation that's designing an algorithm for their businesses, that is now a corporate incentive algorithm. So it's just like, oh, these dirty buzzwords are like gonna scare people. We have to regulate these companies. So it's like, I just couldn't disagree with that. And if you're listening to this, you probably understand why at this point. I think it's become clear why. But regulating is not as efficient as empowering the individual users.
And also, these companies want to get regulated. Make no mistake, regulation is good for big business. Big business loves regulation. Like the idea, because do you think they don't have a hand in the drawing up of this legislation? They make tons of money. They have a huge incentive to be a part of the drawing of the legislation that's going to come down to regulate them. Like they're going to be working with the politicians to write up the legislation to regulate them. And what that legislation is going to do is going to keep competitors out. That's all it's going to do. That's always what happens with regulation, because the people that are inside the industry already making a profit, they know how to work with the regulation and meet those compliance costs and have the economies of scale to handle the regulation. It's the competitors that won't be able to do that, and they're going to keep the competition out, and it's just going to make those products worse because there's going to be less competition available. Like, I think most people prefer Instagram as like the photo sharing app over Facebook at this point, right? And so I think a lot of people would be sad if Instagram never came to exist, because Facebook, we just decided Facebook's our thing. We're going with Facebook. We're just going to regulate it, make sure it's not doing any funny business, and then we're stuck with Facebook forever. Like, no one even only like old people use Facebook now. Like most people have already gotten rid of Facebook.
Yeah, not long before the government regulation of Facebook includes something like at birth, when your state issued Facebook account is created. Yeah, no, that's a little bit extreme, but
yeah,
that's the progression of like how it works. It's like,
yeah,
oh, we're gonna regulate it, but by regulating, we're penning into law this rigorous, anti-competitive measures for any upstart. So it would be
right. And like, there's competitors out there right now. There's a decently profitable company, I think, called DuckDuckGo, and they don't sell targeted ads. They just sell, basically keyword ads. So like, they're not keeping track of you. It's just if you search a keyword, they're gonna like sell you an ad. Like, they're gonna have advertisements based on those keywords, and so they don't collect any data on you, and you could just use DuckDuckGo instead of Google if you don't like them tracking you. And it's like, here's competition providing you the solution. Go use it. It's like, if people don't like DuckDuckGo, I don't want to force them to use DuckDuckGo. If people like Google, then I'm not going to get in their way and tell them what to use. Because essentially, if you're writing up the legislation and saying you're not allowed to track data, well, then Google's going to become DuckDuckGo. And so it's like, now we have all this product that most people are just actually not that interested in. They'd rather have Google. They think it's a better product. And so it's like, I'm not interested in taking optionality away from people. I don't think that's a good thing to do. I don't really see any merit in doing that.
Right. If for no other reason than you just don't understand the second order consequence. You know what I mean? Like, oh, right. yeah, there's a very clear first order, so we must do it, is such a short line of thinking. Like, you have to at least say, there could be a second order from this decision that wouldn't be beneficial for the market, and therefore we would actually all be worse off. Just the ability to make that connection is not being done today. Like, people don't think that way, and we here at Do Less are going to make you think that way if you keep listening to us.
Right. And so, like, it's funny, like, they always talk about, okay, we have the social media problem, right? Like, what do we do? The answer is we don't do anything. In fact, all of us can just do less. We just go on the apps a little bit less, and that's it. Problem solved.
Yeah. All right. There is one thing, and that's another point about this conversation that we had a note about. It's like, the documentary really spends a lot of time like personifying these companies and like the algorithms. Like, there's a literal personification of the algorithm, like this operation room with like these three people that are, this evil intelligence that's like, oh, we got to swipe him, inundate him with stuff he's going to like to watch, and then, slip in these ads. Oh, yeah, we sold it for 3 cents. Haha. Like, they're just like, they're chuckling to themselves. And like the people talking, just the way they talk, it's like, oh, they have these algorithms, and the people that are sitting there, they can turn a knob, and the algorithm does this, and they turn a knob, and it's just like, it's a very personified, the algorithms become very personified, and there's also a very much attribution of intentionality of malice, kind of. It's like, not only do they make a lot of money, but how did they do it? They got together in a room one day and they said, these stupid people, let's take all it's not enough to make money off them. Let's actually take their more, let's take their soul and suck them into these. It's like, all right, you lost me. Like, I have friends that work for Facebook, that work for, these big companies, that work for, I meet people all the time. I work for like Snapchat or whatever. It's like these people, they're just people, right? They're just people. And not to say that there's not, in the name of greed and in the name of making profit, there are definitely morally not great, they're morally, just like not good moral arguments for some of the things they do, the decisions they make. But it's never, like, I would not go so far as to say that these people are evil for doing that. They're just making a product, and they're doing I think what we can attribute this to much more simply, is like, you have an algorithm that sells $11,000 of ads, and it did this method. And you have another algorithm that sold $6,000 of ads, and it did this method. So go with the 11,000. It's like, well, what is the algorithm doing? Oh, well, it's actually targeting tampons to females or whatever. It's stuff like that. It's like, oh, and how do you get females? It's like, oh, you show them this and that females are interested in. It's just like, okay, that's very logically, we can make money off that. Good, run that algorithm. It's just like, there's not people. It's like, that step too far, or that argument is like a street too far. What am I trying to say? A bridge too far to say that it's like, oh, that's actually evil that they sat down and they decided to do this and they pulled it over on us.
Yeah, I think like Occam's razor is like just a great heuristic where it's just don't attribute malice to anything that you can attribute to. I mean, in this case, it's not even stupidity. It's actually it's competence. Actually, they're building a better product that makes more money. But like, there's no reason to just attribute straight up malice to it.
Right. I don't mean to get pedantic. I think Occam's razor is actually.
Was it Hanlon's razor?
Hanlon's razor is the one you're talking. Not to be
Occam's.
Occam's razor is fair. The simplest solution.
True.
Is the one that you should, or you can't make a logical argument that would suggest that anything but the simplest attribution of.
Right, and I mean it's
like
I think that applies here as well. Like, is it that like all these people got together and in secret like conspired to control the world, or is it just like they're following financial incentives? Like, that's the simpler explanation. And so honestly, they both apply in this situation. And the point is, like, they hype up these algorithms like they're these like spooky, like nefarious, like things that are going to control our whole society. And the reality is they're basically just like linear regressions and grouping functions where it's like, here's clusters of people, group them based on interests, and we'll sell ads to those groups. Like, they're really not that complicated. You could understand these algorithms like, pretty easily if you just read a few things on Wikipedia. They're really like not that complex, and all they're trying to do is just better identify your interests and engage you, keep you on the platform longer. And like we said, that can have negative impacts on your mental health, and you should be aware of that. But the idea that there's this like personified evil in these algorithms, that it's like they're just trying to outrage this. It's like, I mean, if outraging you gets you to use the app longer, then yeah, maybe it will try to piss you off. But like, if outraging doesn't get you to use the app longer, then it's not going to do that. It's just trying to get you to use the app longer, and that's all it's doing. So yeah, I think there's a bit of a funny business going on there. Very definitely hyperbolic by the documentary on that part, I would say. Yeah.
So something that I don't think they even cover this in the documentary. I don't really remember, but it's a good point that you had, or that we talked about before. This was like this is completely not part of this conversation at all, but like there are just simply positives of social media. Like there's just like things that people do today that couldn't have been done before without social media. It's like that should be talked about. Like, it's like, oh, we're trying to regulate this. We're trying to get this to not work this way. It's like, well, there are people that have like whole entire jobs based on the fact that they can game this system, that they can actually put something out there that's gonna make you want to click on it. Like, and good for them. Like, they're making money that way. Like, they're selling their product for their business, and their business is doing better. Like there's so many people that are benefiting, and yes, there are negative externalities, but to throw out the baby with the bathwater and say we want to address these negative externalities without even like saying, yeah, by the way, social media makes it a lot better in a lot of different areas. Like it's not doing the logical due diligence.
And I would say it cannot be understated how amazing it is for new companies, like startup companies, growing companies, to be able to cost effectively target their market. Like being able to advertise to the exact market you're looking for at a low price for new businesses is so important and so helpful for like new startups to succeed. And so there is a huge positive sum effect of these social media apps in that they're reducing lots of waste spent on advertising so that it can be just done more effectively and for a lower cost. And like, to just completely ignore that benefit, I think it's just unfair of this movie. I think it's just very one-sided. There's value to it, but ultimately I just not a fan.
Yeah. All right. Well, so go ahead and like and share this podcast on social media, and
follow me on Twitter.
Yeah,
I'll be posting
Jeff. Yeah,
some shirtless pics on Instagram. You can check out those too.
Yeah, right. We are slaves to those likes, so make sure you come through and give us that sweet like that we so desperately need in today's day and age. Is there anything else you want to say about? I think we covered basically all we wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, so if anything we said here today is news to you, maybe check out this movie, get a better understanding of it. Maybe do a little bit less social media if you feel like your mental health is suffering.
Over life.
And don't try to petition the government to do anything because it shouldn't.
Yeah. I did have a note. One thing you said about the heroin use, you said, a society of heroin users are actually worse off, even though that's the free market. So someone might come and listen to this and say like, heroin using society should ban heroin. So just as a footnote, just put that in there. It's like no, it's up to those individuals to stop using heroin. It's actually, right. Even though he was saying it more of like, even though there's a short-term market demand for heroin, that doesn't mean that society is long-term better off with heroin using. And in fact, free market solutions of education and of limiting use is actually the most efficient, and just going in and sweeping government regulation would be a less efficient operation of that.
Right. Yeah. So, like I'm not an advocate for banning things, even if they are detrimental. I'm just more of an advocate of, work on yourself first. I think this is the most important thing to keep in mind is work on yourself first. If social media is negatively affecting your life, fix yourself first. Make sure your mental health is good. If you have to quit cold turkey, you have to just delete them all. If it's that bad, it's that bad. But, if you just need to cut back, or if you're just not using them that much, then you're probably fine anyway. And,
right.
Then, if you have kids, I think it's super important, especially with young girls, to basically keep them aware of what social media is trying to do to them and like the effect it has on them, because I think it is actually really terrible for young girls' mental health to be constantly competing with other girls on how they look and stuff like that. Like, so, if you're a parent, I would say, probably try to limit your kids' social media use. I'm not a parent, but I would I think that sounds like good advice. And then just tell your friends, say, hey, I cut back on social media and it was a positive impact on my life, and maybe you should try it too. And to me, that's how you affect change. Bottom up, not top down.
Yeah, absolutely. As a society, it's so easy to say like a person that like saves their paycheck. It's like, oh, I want to go on vacation, so I'm going to save up all year and go on vacation, and I deserve the It's like, that person obviously made a better decision than someone who went and blew their paycheck each week on a case of beer or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, you can look at those two situations and say, yeah, that person that was able to forego present consumption for a prolonged what I'm trying to say, delayed gratification. Somebody who's able to delay gratification will probably in most cases be better off than someone who's is seeking instant gratification. So we see that with money, but with social media, that's just dopamine. Like, that's just a dopamine stream. Like, someone who's is constantly on social media, that's like someone who's seeking that instant gratification, rather than someone who may read a book, is kind of delaying gratification, but then they'll benefit from the lessons in the book way better than they were able to get from those minutes spent on social media. So we as a society won't look at that person and say, we should ban buying cases of beer. It's like, we should ban expenditure of a certain amount of certain pension. It's like, no, you let people do what they want to with their money. You let people do what they want to with their time. But it's up to us as individuals to delay the gratification and seek the actual optimum solutions for our lives, which we have complete control over.
Yes. I think that's a good summary.
Sweet. All right, well, see you next time. Thanks for doing less. Peace.
Take it easy.